Justice Gaerlan Case Notes Case Numbers 21 to 30. Case Number 21. Ocampo vs. Batara-Sapad, GR Number 256343, April 2, 2025. Focus: Civil Law. Summary. The Supreme Court reversed the Court of Appeals and reinstated the RTC's final award, holding that non-compliance with the statute of frauds does not render an oral sale of real property void but merely unenforceable, and that possession coupled with payment and delivery may validate the buyer's claim. Key points. Doctrines. 1. Non-compliance with the statute of frauds renders a contract unenforceable, not void, and oral agreements for the sale of real property may be admitted in evidence when the contract has been partially executed through delivery and payment. 2. Actual possession of the property and substantial payment of the purchase price may serve as legal basis for ownership, especially when supported by credible witness testimony and documentary evidence such as the owner's copy of the title. 3. Payments made to an unauthorized party do not extinguish the obligation to pay the purchase price, but do not invalidate the buyer's claim when made in good faith and followed by continued possession. Case Number 22. Rural Bank of San Mateo Isabela, Inc. vs. Myrvin A. Ramales and Josie A. Ramales GR Number 256021, April 2, 2025. Focus: Remedial Law. Ruling: the Supreme Court denied the petitions, affirming that certiorari cannot substitute for appeal and that interlocutory orders may only be challenged via Rule 65 upon showing grave abuse of discretion. Key points. Doctrines. 1. The remedies of appeal and certiorari are mutually exclusive, and certiorari under Rule 65 is not a substitute for a lost or improper appeal. 2. Interlocutory orders, such as the denial of a motion to dismiss, are not appealable, and may only be questioned through certiorari if grave abuse of discretion is clearly shown. 3. Petitions raising pure questions of law must be filed directly with the Supreme Court, not the Court of Appeals, as the latter has no jurisdiction over such issues. Case Number 23. Low vs. People, GR Number 258420, February 26, 2025. Focus: Criminal Law. Ruling: the Supreme Court reinstated the trial court's approval of the plea bargain, ruling that objections from the prosecution must be supported by valid evidence and cannot rely solely on internal policy guidelines. Key points. Doctrines. 1. Plea bargaining in drug cases requires mutual consent from both the prosecution and the defense, subject to the trial court's sound discretion and guided by Supreme Court-issued guidelines. 2. The prosecution's objection must be substantiated by valid evidence, not merely by internal policies or generalized concerns, as clarified in Monteiro v. People. 3. The trial court may approve plea bargains when they comply with AM No. 180316 SC, and when doing so promotes justice, efficiency, and fairness based on the case's specific circumstances. Case Number 24. Vera Law v. Hechanova, AC Number 13986, February 26, 2025. Focus: Legal and Judicial Ethics. Ruling: the Supreme Court ruled that while Hechanova was not liable for dishonesty or poaching, she violated Canon 15.03 of the CPR by representing conflicting interests, breaching her fiduciary duty to former clients. Key points. Doctrines. 1. Lawyers owe a fiduciary duty to their clients once a lawyer-client relationship is established, and any act contrary to this duty, such as dishonesty, competing with the firm, or poaching clients, may warrant disciplinary action. 2. Violations of Canons 3, 8, and 8.02 require substantial evidence, and mere allegations of dishonesty or disparagement without proof are insufficient for sanction. 3. Canon 15.03 prohibits representation of conflicting interests, and failure to maintain loyalty to former clients, such as representing adverse parties in related matters, constitutes a breach of professional ethics. Case Number 25. Spouses Palaganas v. Panganiban, AC Number 7632, February 24, 2025. Focus: Legal and Judicial Ethics. Ruling: the Supreme Court ruled that administrative proceedings are not the proper venue for collecting unpaid debts, and dismissed the complaint against Atty. Panganiban for lack of administrative liability. Key points. Doctrines. 1. An administrative case against a lawyer is a disciplinary proceeding, distinct from civil or criminal actions, and is not a venue for enforcing monetary claims. 2. Issues concerning unpaid debts must be pursued in the appropriate civil court, even if the obligation involves dishonored checks or alleged misconduct. 3. A lawyer cannot be held administratively liable for debts incurred by a business entity, especially when the checks were issued under the company's name and not personally by the lawyer. Case number 26. Erwin Bonbon Waitia versus People of the Philippines, GR number 272844, February 24, 2025. Focus: Criminal Law. Ruling: the Supreme Court affirmed Erwin Bonbon's conviction for bigamy, ruling that the crime had not prescribed since the prescriptive period begins upon actual discovery by the offended party or authorities, not upon mere registration of the bigamous marriage. Key points: Doctrines. 1. Bigamy is a public crime against civil status, and its prescriptive period is counted from the date the crime is discovered by the offended party or authorities, not from the date of marriage registration. 2. A marriage certificate is a public document presumed valid, and its existence, along with compliance with legal formalities, is sufficient to establish the validity of the marriage. 3. Claims that a marriage was a sham or lacked proper ceremony must be supported by evidence, and unsupported defenses cannot overcome the presumption of validity attached to public records. Case number 27, Santiago D.J. Sillano vs. JGC Philippines, Inc. and/or Virgilio Saavedra, Eric Tanjutco, and Lolita Faller, GR number 273562, February 24, 2025. Focus: Labor Law. Ruling: the Supreme Court upheld the legality of Sillano's preventive suspension and denied his claims for damages and benefits, ruling that the suspension was justified, within the 30-day limit, and not a penalty. Key points: Doctrines. 1. Preventive suspension is a precautionary, not punitive, measure, valid only when the employee poses a serious and imminent threat to life or property, and must not exceed 30 days under the Labor Code. 2. When justified, the preventively suspended employee is not entitled to the payment of his salaries and benefits for the period of suspension. 3. Claims for damages and benefits must be substantiated and raised at the proper stage, and allegations alone, especially when raised for the first time on appeal, are insufficient to warrant relief. Case number 28. People vs. Sandiganbayan, 1st Division, GR number 274922, February 17, 2025. Focus: Criminal Law. Ruling: the Supreme Court affirmed the dismissal of charges against Tuming and Colas due to inordinate delay in the preliminary investigation, ruling that it violated their constitutional right to a speedy disposition of their case. Key points: Doctrines. 1. The right to a speedy disposition of cases applies to proceedings before judicial, quasi-judicial, and administrative bodies, and is protected under Article 3, Section 16 of the Constitution. 2. Inordinate delays without reasonable justification violate due process, and may result in dismissal of criminal charges, especially when the delay prejudices the accused. 3. Dismissal due to inordinate delay amounts to an acquittal, invoking the protection of double jeopardy and barring re-litigation of the same offense. Case number 29. Atty. Fred L. Bagbagen vs. Ana May F. Perez, GR number 274980, February 17, 2025. Focus: Political Law. Ruling: the Supreme Court upheld the garnishment of Bagbagen's salary, ruling that once public funds are deposited into private accounts, they lose their exemption and become subject to lawful execution. Key points: Doctrines. 1. Public officials' salaries are not exempt from garnishment once deposited into private accounts, unless a specific law provides otherwise. 2. The exemption from garnishment applies only while salaries remain public funds, and does not extend to bank deposits held in the official's name. 3. There is no statutory exemption for public officials' salaries, unlike laborers' wages for family support, making garnishment lawful to satisfy final judgments. Case number 30. Jan Michael B. Aguiling vs. People of the Philippines, GR number 263038, February 17, 2025. Focus: Remedial Law. Ruling: the Supreme Court reinstated the RTC's approval of Aguiling's plea bargain, ruling that trial courts may override prosecution objections if the proposal complies with the Supreme Court's plea bargaining framework. Key points: Doctrines. 1. Trial courts have discretion to approve plea bargaining proposals, even in drug cases, provided they conform to the Supreme Court's framework under AM No. 180316 SC. 2. Prosecution objections must be based on valid and current guidelines, and objections grounded solely on outdated internal policies may be overruled. 3. DOJ Circular No. 18 supersedes Circular No. 027, aligning prosecutorial discretion with the Supreme Court's framework and validating plea bargains that meet its criteria.
Like and follow Amicus Curious for more Justice Gaerlan case notes.